Well, good morning. I am so sorry I'm not able to be there with you today in person at Tomball ISD Spring Collaborative, but I'm traveling today with Dr. Z. Today is the big day to see if she is selected as the National Superintendent of the Year. I can promise you, however, I would much rather be delivering this presentation in person. Hope all goes well today with Tomball ISD on the big stage, but of course my preference would have been to be there with you today. Rodelia, I'm sorry. I know we planned for this presentation for a number of months in advance, and the calendar just didn't work up on Friday. But I hope that everyone is able to use this presentation, and maybe it being on Zoom and archive, that's for the better. But my name is Michael Webb. I'm the Chief Academic Officer. I think I know most of you in the room. I was going to give Rosemary a congratulations on your retirement, but I understand that I can hold that for a few more months and at least another semester. So I will hope to see you soon, and hope to see all of you in person too, so we can talk more about assessment. So many of you do know, but have not been able to meet everybody in the room, that to let you know that I'm a diagnostician. I've been a diagnostician for a long time. Was able to have the opportunity to teach at Sam Houston in their program for assessment. Did that for a long time too. So I hope I can give you a little bit of information today to make your jobs just a little bit easier. Whenever we talk assessment, I think it's important to know that the diagnostician, above any other job type and any district, produces more in writing than anybody else. You produce more in writing than the superintendent of schools, produce more in writing than me. You produce more in writing than the communications department. And a lot of your integrity as an assessment specialist doesn't come by how well you administer the assessments, doesn't come by how well you understand all the G factors and narrows and broads and how all of those work. It comes across, your integrity is built by how you communicate. And your number one method of communication is writing. That also, your number one method of communication is the number one thing that requires the most time as well. And I understand that. And hopefully today we can talk about some strategies and techniques that can save you in time and help you be more concise in your writing. Also wanted just to let you know, just to, that you do know that an ARD meeting is in no way similar to a parent conference. There are a lot of long-term decisions that are being made at ARD meetings. In most ARD meetings, the parent was not their initial wish of how they had to navigate the school system. I do know ARD meetings are extremely contentious. I've been in probably thousands of them. But you, as a diagnostician and Tomball ISD, as the facilitator of all ARDs, really are the face of the district. And I say that because, again, it's not a parent meeting, because a lot of those are set up in a positive context. But the grace, the patience, and love that's required of many of you at many of the ARD meetings is not required anywhere else. And you're the face of the district because people can see the culture of the district by how you handle the difficult times. And I know that there have been very many difficult ARDs this school year, and that's not going to end. That's just part of the job that we all signed up for. I appreciate all of your mediation skills that you have developed over the years. And that too also speaks to your integrity or the quality of your assessment. A diagnostician that is unable to mediate difficult meetings with parents, a diagnostician that is not writing as well as he or she should, gives a parent pause in trusting you in the quality of the data that you are collecting. So just wanted to, mention those reminders to let you know the importance of of the diagnostician. Our public school system in Tomball SD would not operate without diagnosticians. We're approaching 13 to 14% of our population now is identified as having a disability. That's more than 1 out of 10. The number of diagnosticians are increasing every year. I hope that we can look at increasing more diagnosticians for next year. The budget cycle is always a difficult time of the year. I also want to say that Carrie is doing a fantastic job in advocating for you. I meet with her every week. You know, I used to be able to spend more time with you, but not able to do that now. But I do meet with Carrie every week. And she does keep me up to date on, you know, what's going on, major ideas, major themes that you're talking about, and also a lot of the challenges. And I do understand workloads are heavy. I understand that we're still adding 1,000 kids a year in Tomball ISD. So if you think about that, that's about like adding 1 elementary school every year. And we're not building 1 elementary school every year because we've been increasing by 1,000 kids for the last 7 years in a row. The next 4 years, we'll have new schools that are coming up. So you'll see a lot of caseloads go down at Grand Oaks specifically. I think over the next 2 years, those of you that are serving elementary schools in the Woodlands area will see a big relief as well. And then, of course, TIS will come down in 25, 26 from their significant enrollment. Those of you that are supporting the high school, if you can hold out just 2 more years, I think you'll see a big relief in caseloads once West High School is open. So, you know, a lot to talk about in the district, and I think it's exciting. But I do know a lot of the not just from being a diagnostician, but I do know the circumstances right now are difficult. So I do appreciate your work every single day. I know that the community does. I know that parents of children with disabilities do, because I receive probably 100 to 1 compliments on the quality of your work. Comparison just to the very few negative comments that I get every once in a while, which often we can resolve very quickly. But today we are here to talk about focused assessment, targeted assessment, as a way to become more specific in our evaluation methods, but I think a way that also that can help save you a lot of time. Share my screen. I think everyone should be able to see the slideshow now. So like I said, I've been a diagnostician for a long time, so I do understand, I do subscribe to the method that really Jerome Sattler sets the standard, right? All of you in here that have been in some diagnostician school somewhere in Texas probably use the Assessment of Children book for diagnosticians as your Bible. So I was looking back, I was able to find the 6th and 5th edition, which definitely I taught as a professor. But actually, I couldn't find the actual Sattler book, the edition that I learned on, which I think was probably edition maybe 2 or 3. And now I'll understand we're already at the 7th edition. But regardless of which Jerome Sattler book you were trained under, there was part of that Bible of assessment that talked about a focus assessment. A focus assessment is more targeted in scope than a full evaluation. It is data-driven. Of course, consent is required, but it's more flexible and it's based more on a collaborative process. You know, 5 factors of a focus assessment is that, you know, they for sure are time efficient. I think that this is not cutting corners. This is not shorting the benefit of an evaluation for a student. It's becoming much more specific and delivering a more meaningful evaluation for the student. These assessments are definitely more cost effective. They dive deeper into the areas of disability. They minimize unnecessary testing, because remember, the first rule in cross-battery assessment is that you don't cross batteries. And I felt like that was always important when I was giving assessments, definitely important as when I was teaching assessment, but also to reiterate now. The first rule in cross batteries assessment is you don't cross the batteries unless you have to. And focus assessment, of course, would not require any or much of at all of any cross battery assessment. And I do think it leads to more actionable recommendations. Slides are a little bit out of order, but if we were to look at the special education evaluation continuum, we look at everything, the far side from initial reevaluations to the other side, reevaluations. And we look at what that assessment is called, for whom is that assessment intended, how do we deliver that assessment, and then a little bit about the compliance is consent required. So on the very first part of the continuum, we have our comprehensive individual evaluation. We have our FIE. It's comprehensive. It assesses all areas of cognitive functioning, looks at all areas of academic achievement, and these are for global disabilities. So when the referral committee is referring a student for a suspected disability, and the suspected disability is AU, ED, other health impairment, intellectual disability, those are global disabilities. Those are disabilities that impact the student in every aspect of their life and in every classroom that they will attend in our school district. Those disabilities in some ways tend to be more significant, but again, require a full evaluation, and a full evaluation meaning that we formally assess with assessment instruments all areas of cognitive and academic functioning. And of course, a consent is required for a FIE. I think this is the most familiar form of assessment. I don't think anyone is surprised by the description of what an FIE is. And this is what we typically do for initial evaluations or even reevaluations. But in talking with Rodelia, I know that she wants to broaden the scope of what diagnosticians are broaden the scope of decisions that diagnosticians can make. So when we look at a comprehensive individual initial individual assessment, right, an FIIE, for kids that are suspected of having a learning disability only. What and how do we assess those kids? So of course you could choose option one, which is the FIE. It's comprehensive. We are testing all areas with formal data, cognitive and academic achievement, but a more limited scope of evaluation for an initial evaluation would be formally assessing all cognitive areas, just like you would in this first option. But number two would then assessing academic areas only in areas of suspected disability. So if we're referred for a disability, a student's failing to respond to intervention in the area of reading comprehension, then we would only assess thoroughly reading comprehension. We would also assess associated components of reading, which would be fluency and phonics and phonemic awareness. But we might not delve into those as much, and then we certainly wouldn't have to collect as much formal data in the area of mathematics. So again, this takes some nuance by the diagnostician to ensure that we are not inadvertently introducing any bias into our assessment and de-NQing some students that might otherwise be eligible for an evaluation. But this is really staying within the area of the suspected disability. This is not a focused assessment by any means. This could be done as an initial evaluation. But what I'm trying to say, if a student's referred for mathematics, and then the diagnostician assesses all areas of academic functioning, and we find a disability in reading, then the student is not disabled in reading. There has to be a functional limitation to justify any disability. It does not matter if they have a pattern of strengths and weaknesses in reading if the student was referred for math. And I think that that's very important. And that's whether we're doing this type of specific evaluation for a learning disability or even the full evaluation. areas of disability identified by the diagnostician cannot exceed the scope of the referral from the student intervention team. I think this is somewhat of a time saver, but I think it's a money saver, because also you see, and I don't think that we're doing it near to the degree that we have in the past, but in the past we see many ARD committees prescribing services through an IEP and allocating teachers, whether we're teachers or paraprofessionals and in-class support, or either SS and SS2, in areas in which kids are not eligible or were not initially eligible for having a disability. So it is the right of a child with a disability to struggle in all areas, right? And if a student with a reading disability is struggling in math, then our first attempt to mitigate those math difficulties is not to give them an IEP. Our first attempt to mitigate the math difficulties would be providing that student the same intervention we provide any other kid in the district if they're struggling in math. And it's not to overprescribe special ed services to a student in an area outside of their disability without a formal evaluation. I think most of that, I think we're doing that. I don't think that this is new information for you, but just wanted to make sure that I kind of lead up to what we're here for today, and that's the focused assessment. And again, consent required for this type of evaluation for sure. So the next is this is the focus assessment. A focus assessment can only be chosen as a reevaluation option. We wouldn't do a focus assessment as a part of an initial evaluation. And once we talk about how, you will understand the reasoning behind this. So a focus assessment definitely can be used for any kid that has already been identified as having a specific learning disability. Now, how is the focus assessment different from these other two options that I've spoke about? Is that the focus assessment only formally assesses cognitive and academic weaknesses only. That's it. Other areas of assessment are gathered with informal data, much like the READ process. So if we were doing a focus assessment for a student who is already identified as having a reading disability in the area of reading comprehension, and on that initial evaluations, we saw GC and working memory as the two cognitive areas that were contributors to the learning disability. Then we would only assess GC and working memory. Those were the two cognitive weaknesses that were contributing to the learning disability. That's all that we're going to assess with formal assessment. If the student was only identified as having a disability in the area of reading comprehension, then the only areas in which we are going to give two or more subtests would be in the area of reading comprehension. We would not need to look at phonemic awareness, phonics, or fluency, because in the prior evaluation we've already determined that those are strengths. We're not looking at GV or visual processing or short-term memory or long-term retrieval or fluid reasoning, perhaps, because in the past assessment those were already identified as strengths. So a lot of people might have the question, well, say that again. This option number 2, right? FIE in the area of a suspected disability, and then what you're talking about now, focus assessment, those kind of sound the same. Well, remember, an initial evaluation only in the area of a suspected disability is still going to assess all cognitive areas of functioning, because you do not know yet the pattern of strengths and weaknesses. While you might only be assessing the academic weaknesses that were identified by the referral team, you're still identifying the full breadth of the cognitive areas. So a focus assessment, you no longer have to assess the full breadth of the cognitive areas. You're only assessing the weaknesses. In most cases, that might be 2 broad Gs. In some cases, maybe 3. I think in maybe rare cases, 4. But only in the areas of weakness. And then certainly in the academic area, only the areas of weakness. I think that this will lead to more actionable recommendations. I think you're talking specifically about the area of weakness, why that's the purpose of the ARD meeting. That's how we develop present levels. That's how we determine what the goal is. That's how we determine the schedule of services and the accommodations that a student needs by talking about their challenges associated with their disability. So a focus assessment answers all the questions that we need answered through a reevaluation, but it limits the amount of testing, which then limits or reduces the amount of time that you're having to spend on assessment. And it's much more, I think it's much more germane to who the student is. So that's a focus assessment. Of course, consent is always going to be required for a focus assessment. And then the third or the fourth option is the read. So an FIE by way of the read process, and we're collecting informal data in all areas and referring to that prior evaluation to substantiate the pattern of strengths and weaknesses for a student with a learning disability. Or we're using the read process to substantiate the global disability that might have already been assessed. So in talking with Rodelia too, I know that there was a lot of questions about, well, how many initial evaluations do we need to have, right? These first two options, a comprehensive individual evaluation, an FIE, or a comprehensive individual evaluation in areas of suspected disability. How many of those do we need? So those are the big evaluations. How many of those do we need before we can do a focused assessment? And how many of those do we need before we can do a read? Remember, I'm a diagnostician, so I know that our tendency is to just give me a number, right? Is it 3, and then I know what to do, or is it 2, or is it by the 5th grade, or whatever? So I'm going to give you some guideposts, but the guideposts are no substitute for your judgment. So a student that's identified as having a global disability, and they're going to EEA, and they're 3 years old, and the diagnosis is NCECAU, then when they're 6 years old, we need to do another full evaluation, right? We've already said by having the NCEC label that we're not as comfortable as we would like to be. We know there's definitely a challenge involved, but we're not really as comfortable. That's why we've said NCEC. So that 3-year-old evaluation counts as 1. We definitely would want to reassess as a 6-year-old. And I think even in that case, we would always reassess as a 9-year-old. The next assessments, then I think that we're choosing possibly a read for those kids. But in those cases, we're always doing 3. Remember, you're asking a kid, in most cases, when you conduct an assessment, you're asking a kid to go to an unfamiliar place with an unfamiliar person, and you're asking them unfamiliar questions, and then you're getting IQ scores and cognitive profiles and academic profiles, and then we're making big-time decisions on that. I tend not to have confidence when we ask a 3-year-old to go to an unfamiliar place with an unfamiliar person and ask them unfamiliar questions, or even through unfamiliar observations, and then think that that assessment is golden and good for the rest of their career. I don't think that that's right. I think that in those cases, and in most cases, the default is you're all going to give 3 evaluations before we're defaulting to a focus assessment or even a read. I think that there are some exceptions to that. I think a student with a more pervasive or significant disability that's more organic, of course, we may trim on that a little bit. It might not have to do 3 full evaluations all the time to say the student continues to have the disability, when we know that's a lifetime condition, a substantial lifetime condition that this child will always have. I think that those are rare. But your question probably is, okay, well, most of the kids you're talking about right now with learning disabilities are they're not identified at 3 to 5-year-old anyway. Most of our kids with learning disabilities, that's not the onset of a learning disability isn't really coming into play until, maybe 1st grade, some 2nd grade. I think by, 2nd to 3rd, probably 4th are our biggest referral time periods. So let's just take that kid. Let's just take a student that's 9 years old in the third grade. So we're definitely saying that that first evaluation has got to be a full evaluation, whether we're testing all areas or we're doing assessment in the areas of suspected disability. That first one at age 9 is going to be, it's going to be these FIEs that we're talking about. Again, unfamiliar person, unfamiliar place, asking unfamiliar questions as a 9-year-old or even 10-year-old, even a 15-year-old. I still think that second evaluation must be a full, right? It's got to be a full evaluation. And then we look, did that second full evaluation confirm what we said 3 years ago? So the kid now is 12 years old and now rolling up on there as a 15-year-old. And now we're saying, okay, now we do want to do a read or a focus assessment. I think now then you have the option, right? So that's not really 3, but it's 2 leading into a student that's going to be 15 years old, right? 9, 12, and 15. I think in that case, then you make the decision. I think that your decision always is made based on the level of challenges that student has in the classroom, right? The more significant the challenges, then the more that you're going to want to the more significant the learning disability challenge in the classroom, despite special ed services. So again, we have this 9-year-old who was 12 and 15 and still 3 or 4 years off level in the area of reading, then I'm probably doing a focus assessment or a read assessment. A student who has made tremendous progress and is closing that achievement gap significantly, then I may do a full evaluation there because I'm looking for a possible dismissal. But those are some of the questions that you really have to grapple with. So maybe we have a 7-year-old that is identified as having LD. So at 7 is going to be a full. Age 10 is going to be a full. But age 13, again, I think then you're making the decision between a focused and a read. I don't think that, I think in some cases, the read may be appropriate, but again, the read is doesn't give you as much of a leg to stand on, especially in the area of present levels, academic goals, and then the level of services that you provide. So I guess in general, the younger the student, the more global the disability, probably 3. The later the student is identified as having a disability, probably at least 2 evaluations before we go to a focused. And that focus assessment really serves as that third evaluation, which you are still collecting formal cognitive and academic data. And then certainly that 4th or 5th evaluation, if we're still continuing to need special ed services, would be a read. I think the question would be, okay, the kid's 10, 12 years old. I'm choosing to do a focused assessment, and I'm assessing the cognitive and academic weaknesses only. They were, 72, 75s, maybe a 63, 64 on your standard scores. And now you're getting something completely different, especially in the academic areas. I think this is not common, but I think it is, it's not rare either. So in the academic reassessment, again, you're getting now 88s, 89s, 94s, 95s, and you're not seeing the weaknesses. When you say, hey, I was only assessing just the weaknesses, now they're all strengths. What do I do? I think then you broaden the assessment. You then look at the cognitive areas of weakness. If those are coming back as strengths now too, then you expand the scope of the evaluation and you revert to a full, because now you're looking at a possible dismissal. I think it is difficult. I don't know if it's completely rare, but I think it's difficult ever to use a focused assessment to D&Q a student. I think we could get there with more training and more guidance. But I think at this point, I would not want to rest only on a focused assessment for a D&Q. If you're challenged with that, I think that the district's position will be, we'll just do a full anyway. But I think that you can, I think that we'll get there. Rodelia talked about, as we're moving to more decision-making of the diagnostician as a way to be more specific with our assessments and also to save time. I think there's going to be a point to where we need to be able to make more decisions. But I think at this point, I would not recommend a focus assessment for a kid that you're D&Qing. With that said, I think the exceptions are a student that has closed the achievement gap significantly and in no way is needing any of the accommodations or the IEP services that the student has had for the prior 3 or 6 years. You're looking at multiple assessments, district benchmark assessments, unit assessments, STAR results, the interim. You're looking at STAR REN, and this kid is doing extremely well. You cannot find the achievement gap. Those kids, yeah, I think we do a focus assessment, go for a D&Q. I think those kids are rare though, unfortunately, right? Because Tomball ISD diagnosticians do a good job. You're identifying those kids with disabilities. We don't have a lot of false negatives, right? Kids that we are saying are falsely identified as having a disability when they really don't. We don't have a lot of those, and that's because you're doing a good job. But I think that would be one area in which I probably would say, okay, maybe a focus assessment could be a D&Q. When the classroom data, the teacher report, the teacher observations, the parent report, in the past 3 years of history is saying the student really does not need the IEP at all. So we are gearing up for a D&Q. I think in those cases, then possibly the focus assessment could be used as a D&Q. Again, it's going to be a time saver. It's going to be much more specific, and it's going to require you to rely on the classroom data, which is always the most powerful data in an assessment. I think that we could do that. So if you don't know, we have a FAQ on evaluations, which include re-evaluations. You click on the link. We have added a whole section. Actually, that's your handout. I'm going to have to relink it when you get the slides, but this might even be better. So on the student support resources site, you have an area called guidance documents. When you click on guidance documents, go all the way down to reevaluations. To reevaluations. You click on the reevaluation link. It gives you a pretty in-depth FAQ really on anything you want to know about a reevaluation. When to read, when not to read, what a read is, consent, who has responsibility, all that. That's another training. But if you scroll all the way down, we've added a number of questions and answers on a focus assessment. So the focus assessment really begins with item number 21, is defining what a focus assessment is. And I think by now we can all answer that's targeted. We're assessing only areas of cognitive weaknesses and academic weaknesses that were priorly or that have already been identified. It further explains where to target. Kind of diagnostician like to complete a full an individual evaluation by way of a focus assessment, of course, a full and individual initial evaluation by way of a focus assessment. Of course, that answer is going to be no. We've talked about why. we've talked a little bit about the difference between a read and a focus assessment. A read is entirely built and based on the prior assessment, and it's substantiated with informal data only. Consent is not required. Consent for a focus assessment is required, and there's formal assessment only in the academic and cognitive areas of weakness. This is what we talked about a little bit. What if you're assessing, you're getting in there, and then there are no more weaknesses? Well, then that's when you broaden the scope of the evaluation in most cases to lead to a possible D&Q. If you get in there and there are no weaknesses and classroom performance is extremely high, again, in those rare cases, we might go to a D&Q at that moment. And then, of course, parent consent is not required. Can focus assessment, again, reiterating, it's not there for initial evaluation. So again, I wish I was there with you now. We could use this time as a discussion, but I know that Rodelia is, and she's going to collect all the questions that you have. We're going to document those in this FAQ just to make sure it's clear on how we can better use this focus assessment as a way to better understand the student's disability, and definitely as a way to save time. I think when we look at writing, we're spending the bulk of our time writing the assessment in the cognitive areas of weakness and the academic areas of weakness, and we're not contributing as much of our time and our narratives to strengths. We can rely on that from whatever was said in the prior two evaluations. So I hope this explanation helped. I hope we didn't go too fast. Again, Rodelia is there to answer any questions that you may have. I'll be back soon, so I can help see how well the presentation was received. But I hope that you all know that your position is valued, not just from someone that knows your work, but someone who has actually done your work. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great day of learning, and I will see you all very soon.